1987, when I was the editor of a little newspaper called El Tecolote in San Francisco, and Roberto Lovato wandered in and suggested some stories about El Salvador. He was a little concerned about what he wanted to say. So I think in some of those stories you adopted a pseudonym, Tito Alvarenga. And so, so Roberto was this incredibly powerful personality, even then, and is today, and remains today. Just somebody who I was just so impressed by how he had studied rhetoric at Berkeley. So he had this incredible intellectual energy, but he was also somebody who you want to have next to you if the fight broke out, like in a bar. And Roberto also told me stories of fights that he got into and things that he did that he's not always proud of. And he was just this incredibly honest and open person, and somebody who was just intellectual and passionate about his community and passionate about ideas. And then over the years, I watched him have this slowly evolving career as an activist and as a journalist, as a writer. And Roberto, I always thought he had a book in him, and myself and several other people, we encouraged him. And finally last year, Unforgetting came out to really wonderful reviews and great reception in the Latino community, because it's a book that I think is filling this need that we have in our community for voices that are angry and acerbic, because so much of Latino literature that's published in New York Publishing, and I know this as I published many books, in New York Publishing, it's a struggle to have. It's a struggle to go against the tide of stereotype, this idea of us as this passive people, and to find people who are writers who are willing to take chances and do things that aren't expected of us. And that certainly fills the bill of Roberto. And so Roberto, I think I first question I want to ask you, and it's not on the list of things that you suggested, so this is a curveball. Is just tell us, to write a book, to finish a book, is this really difficult thing to do. It's una locura, right? And it's I had a teacher tell me once that writing a book is something that people do like quickly rushing to fail, right? And because it's like this act of madness. Tell us about the moment in which you decided that you were going to write a book, and write this book particularly.
Well, before anything, I want to thank Viva for haranguing me into the ends of the earth to come and do something here at this lovely space. It's just, I walk down here and I'm reminded of Mission Street, circa 1970s and 80s, where there was, and you can quote me, but there was actually a Latino community in the Mission.
Wow.
Right, not like the two-dimensional murals and kind of pollos en el mercado that we become in the Mission, chickens in the market, where you're just this little minority. That's why I love LA. And this space just reminds me of the kind of energy we need. I won't go into the details of kind of back end that make this possible beneath the radar of certain authorities in the state, where I think that's how we need to be. We need to be like we did that Media campaign. We didn't have a 501c3 nonprofit. We just said, there's our target, let's jam them up. So thank you, Viva, for all your work. She's a force. I mean, she's Hector's former
newspaper,
LA Times. And so I'm just so proud of Hector. Ever since I know him, he's been an encouraging voice for my writing and other things. He's been a friend. I'm, godfather his kid, and Hector's trajectory speaks for itself. And I'm just really proud of you, Hector. I mean, you really done the work. And like he said, he was one of a few voices that encouraged me to write, including like Ruben Martinez and my old friend here on the east side, Maricela Norte, she encouraged me, our mutual friend, she told me I had a poet's kind of sensibility, and I was like, oh, and I was doing my activism thing, and I kind of flirted with writing, and, you know, like as in love, you flirt, it's one thing, but if you're committed, it's another, right? So, people like Hector and Maricela and Mike Davis, Rubendi, they taught me to commit to the word. And it makes a total difference because, you know, when you flirt, it's wonderful. When you have that subconscious commitment where the biggest power inside of you, your subconscious, has an organizing principle around it, right? You can really kind of wreak havoc on shit. So it applies to organizing, and then I applied it to writing. So, so the question is, what led me to finally decide to write a book? Well, you know, I've been thinking about this stuff for a long time. I had people tell me, hey, Lovato, you have a book in you know, and I'm like, I guess, you know, I don't make cameo appearances like in books like in Hector's, where there's this ghetto couple in MacArthur Park back in the day, you know, at the end of the peace accords in the 1980s. And, you know, Hector interviewed us and we said, you know, me and my partner G said, yeah, you know, we don't want to be kind of our names in there. So we're anonymously appearing in Translation Nation. So I've always had this book, something like it about Ten Salvadoreños story, because, you know, I learned early on that, I learned from El Salvador, for example, that you can't really kill people unless you erase them.
Mhm.
You know, you would have, during the war, you would have Roberto that we saw the founder of the death squad backed by the US coming on television and starting to like throw acid and darts and knives at people on national television, calling them picuacos, comunistas, etc. And then those people would inevitably oftentimes end up dead. So the relationship between the dehumanization and the erasure and not just killing people, but passing immigration policies like the Democrats and Republicans have passed on their people. All that requires a level of discourse that dehumanizes. I think we'll get into it, I'm sure, about the national. It's been clear to me for a long time that Latinos, Latinx peoples have been put in a position of being what I call the tropical sidekicks of the national narrative. We're not actors. We don't exercise agency in the public mind.
Right, right.
We're rendered into this position by, I think, the elite interests that need us to be that and not the people that put off those massive marches around 2006 or around Proposition 187. And so there's a real thing we need to kind of get into. So I had no other books already I was thinking about. And then I realized, shit, man, I'm 50 something. I better write something quicker. Because one of the books was about you know, a figure that was this epic figures I want to write. And I didn't feel like I had the literary chops. I named Francisco de Miranda. Great revolutionary. And then there's another book I had thought of, but I said, man, I better do something. I had this story and I went to visit. I have the story I've been forgetting it for years brewing. In the form of trauma and other stuff, right? So I went to this immigrant prison, right? Because they're not detention centers, they're really prisons when you go there. If you've been there, there's guards, there's gates, there's barbed wire, there's rotten food, rotten bologna, rotten milk, you know, but there's children in them, there's mothers, but they can't call them prisons because Barack Obama, Biden, they wouldn't look MSNBC ready. So I went to this prison invited by my friends from here in LA, actually, who were living in Austin, and they invited me to a conference. And then, being good leftists, they said, "Hey, why don't you come with us to Carnes?" And I'm like trying to avoid the whole Salvadoran thing. Like, there's an author named, ¿cómo se llama este? Elasco. ¿Cómo se llama? Horacio Castellanos Moya.
Yes.
You wrote Elasco, like, Elasco. And that's how you feel in some ways when you've been through some of the things that we've been through in terms of violence, death, oppression, and negative stuff. So I'm like, I don't really want to deal with that side of our shit. But I love these guys. They invited me down to Carnes prison, and I meet this kid And the kid tells me this sad story about his seeing his uncle shot in the face in a park. And man, I was tired and just broke the fences down. And really, I said, fuck, I'm gonna do something about this. And I pulled that story out of me, and I said, I decided to write it. But before I wrote it, I said, why is this? You're gonna think with a heavy emotional, spiritual content to do this, like I hated therapist.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it turned out to be a former hippie, son of a Holocaust survivor, and one. Anybody want to guess?
What can I say?
3 letters. L, S, D. So I've microdosed and macrodosed my way through unforgetting. I'm going to publish an article about this. It was actually going to be in the New York Times, but I kind of ran up against the Michael Pollan psychedelic industrial complex. It's about to hit our consciousness. And so they killed it. So I got it published somewhere else. So I'll share as you. But yeah, at that moment I decided I'm gonna do something about this, and then I took the steps to write it and sought out my high councils, literary consigliaries like Hector and others. So like my friend is back there, and I did it.
You a lot about issues of marginalization and erasure. Can you remember a moment? Can you remember what it was like to be a person who didn't have a public voice? Can you remember what it was like to be, when you still, people saw you that way, you hadn't quite,
Yeah, I was in LA. Before I became the director of Gaius, and I became the head Salvadoran in the US, de facto, because it was the biggest American organization in the US. And that required me to adopt this public persona that I wasn't really prior to, right? And I worked in nonprofits, I did fundraising with mission, and I wrote for Tecolosa, but I wasn't really out there, and I wasn't really completely radicalized like I had gotten in El Salvador. And so, yeah, I remember what it was like to be pretty much a non-entity in the public sphere. As Salvadoreños, especially, we are not in now. This is the first nonfiction book published by one of the New York publishers, the Big Five, not Big Four, because it's conglomerated. Published by one of us, nonfiction. We have fiction, we have Hector and others, Hector, Francisco Goldman. But in nonfiction, like memoir or something like that, this is the first one by a Salvadoreño.
Right.
So there's only been a few million of us here for decades. And somehow they did manage to find a lot of white women. Valeria Luiselli, who's, with outside of a certain circle of intimacy of our community, she's, take 3 circles from where I'm at, she's one of us to some people. I'm like, oh, she grew up in embassies. And anyway, I don't want to start.
We are on Facebook Live.
Yeah, that's, I think, part of. So, yeah, you got, meeting you, Joe Gideon, giving us the primary. I remember, this goes to your question. I remember reading Joe Gideon's Salvador, and it gave us the primary reference for El Salvador and for Salvadorans in the English language.
Right.
And the phrase is, terror is the given of this.
Wow.
I remember being in college and being like, fuck, well, that's I'm gonna try to fit my experience into that. That's deep. She's getting a real story. And I was a kid, and I grow, and then eventually I become a writer. And I'm in my 50s, and I'm like, okay, terror is the given of the fucking place, but what about everything else? Okay, where's the hocotes? Where's the mango? Where's the popopush? The pupusas? Where's my mom's love? Where's my grandmother's transnational vision for our family? Where's all this other gorgeous and good stuff? it wasn't there. And where did she write the book? From the embassy. She spent a lot of time in the embassy. So, yeah, that feeling of being colonized is, I know it, and I still got, every so often I'll see the kind of the colonial culture come out of my subconscious. I think it's a constant process where we have to keep cleaning the hard drive of all this crap that's downloaded, beginning with my parents. I'm sorry, but it's a fact. I mean, you read people like I do, like R.D. Lang, great psychologist and philosopher of the 60s. He wrote a book called The Politics of Experience, and another called The Politics of the Family. His thesis was that basically your first contact with the state are your parents, because of their subconscious and the way they transmit all these values, whether it's through religion, through novella culture and Univision culture and stuff. I mean, I like to get into Memoria. I didn't realize that all this other matter that was inserted in there without their or my knowing. So.
There's a lot of family in your book, right? Your dad's a huge character in it. Has there been any, and you have a big family, you have brothers and you have, I imagine lots of cousins and whatnot, and on both sides.
A lot of writing I'm doing.
Yeah. So what has been the reaction of your family to the book?
Well, thankfully, I've been a strategist in different realms before writing a book and an organizer. So I'm like, okay, fuck, how am I gonna align this agenda with the book, the agenda of the family? So I was like, fuck, because I'm gonna out pop. My book is a father-son story. Before any of y'all want to counsel me for that. I mean, there's a lot of women that I'm happy with women that are in there, but it's not about those. I tell the story of violence between father and son. It allows me to do different things. So like my dad, outside of an immediate circle, is this larger than life figure. Funny man, poetic, lyrical, and charming can be, but violent, humiliate me sometimes. So, I have the arc of my story. My dad is love pop, love and hate pop, love, hate, and rebel against pop, and Salvador and U.S. state, and then love pop again when I figure out like why pop was the way pop was. So, I had to really think very carefully how I depicted my dad, because I was the wrath of my sibling, Thea, friends like Muhammad, my dad. So I had to what you do in strategy and politics is people for the lowest hanging fruit or the nearest, you get one, then you get another, and then another, and another. But I had to align all with the agenda to know that this was coming, that pop was going to be in all his glory, his Orphic power and lyricism, but he's also got that other shit that you all know and you can't deny. So if you're going to write about your family, you want to tell the truth. Organize them first. Is my message to the young writers. And I think that part of I see that as ideological and political work, actually, for ourselves especially, and for you're not going to organize your family around Marxist-Leninist principles and join the revolutionary movement, but it is useful to keep the family intact, to be able to have them understand what you're doing. And it's on a personal level, I think it's really liberating to tell the truth. I think we need to bust out of what I call, and I said this when they were asking me about Sunrise's there, I was coined the term on democracy now, the folkloric industrial complex of US Latino literature. So the way that, we kind of dance and with galas and hey, colorful me and wow, class issues, who gives a shit, and anything resembling any emancipatory sensibility is not really part of the mix in this concept of literature that people have.
Well, there's a big difference between Sandra's, House on Mango Street.
I loved House on Mango Street.
And also her work, her story, Woman Hollering Creek. So Woman Holland Creek, I mean, is essentially the girl from House on Anglo Street growing up and having sex and doing all kinds of bad things. But the book that's become like the mega bestseller is the one in which she's a little kid, which I think says more about the market and the way people want to read us than it really does say about Simon.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
but we are public personas. So
Yes.
you either dance for the fucking man or you try to smash the man, right? So that's the world you live in. That's the future that awaits us right now, because the challenge of climate change and the devastation and fascism brought by capitalism is not good. You're not going to liberal progress your way out of this shit, right? So we need an imaginary, a political imaginary that's a little more transcendent and powerful that way, and make for sustainability. And so when Sandra goes, and I would never have said anything had she not come out and said about this book called
Oh, American Dirt.
American
Oh,
Dirt,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
that it was, well, no, not, but it was like, not just the great novel of America,
Right.
but the great novel of Las Americas.
Yeah.
So basically, Sandra,
Right.
Gabriela Mistral, go to hell, you're nothing. Gabo, sorry, bro, you're done. Bolaño, olvidarte, mano. Go,
Ciao.
you're still dead, bro, stay dead. Here is Janine Cummins, the new force in Latin American and US literature. So like, how could you, I could never see you do that. I could never see
No, I would never have
you
done
do
that.
that. I could never see anybody I know that has intellectual, political integrity kind of coming out and dancing for the man like that on cue. So I think that's really dangerous to do. I mean, like, even to her credit, Salma Hayek saved her. And when we launched Dignidad Literaria, man, Salma said, you know what? All right, they confessed. I didn't even read that fucking thing. You know, she's like, I didn't even read it, okay? They just sent it to me. Because she felt. She felt, and that's what we need to make them feel to protect your kid.
Yeah, that whole thing, to me, it exposed the little corruptions in American literature, because all kinds like that. Usually it's a big scandalo, because there's not somebody like you and all of, it's sort of like, to make it a scandal. But, people are just doing favors for one another, and it's just a small group of people, I mean, I remember I wrote a really negative review of a novel by an African-American woman, I forgot her name, Anaya Mathis, I think is her name. And I got all these messages from people thanking me for basically taking down this novel, which did an Oprah book club kind of choice. And people it's like an established writer, really sort of established Chicago, white Chicago writer, telling me, thank you so much for doing that, Hector. It was like, that was such a terrible book. A really, really powerful agent, West Coast agent, called me, thank you so much, Hector. That's such a terrible book, And I mean, it really was a sort of melodramatic book, but it got on the cover of the New York Times Book Review, and it was, Oprah sort of picked it up. And it was because people were doing each other favors. She went to the Iowa Writers Workshop, and somebody did a favor for somebody who did a favor, and they all lined up and said, look, this is the great new thing for that week. And that's what happened with that book, was that there was this publishing house that spent like a lot of money to buy it, and they wanted to get their money back, and so they pulled out all the
Yeah,
chops.
movie deal already ready.
Yeah, they had they did all this stuff. Whereas you and I, we were fighting even just to get one person to blurb our books.
7 language translation before it even got published.
Right.
Already
Yeah.
committed. They still haven't committed to translating my book.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a whole big, So to me that was, it was a scandal, but it's the kind of scandal that we're so marginal in that world, right? I mean, I know one Latino editor who works at a New York publishing house, and he's like 30 years old. He's only been at the job for like 5 years. We both know him, right? Danny Vasquez. And there must be a couple of others, but there's just so few.
Well, there is. They are in YA.
In
Right
YA.
now, they know.
Wow.
Yeah, those barbarians have a lot of kids. We're gonna sell them cocoa literature and stuff that speaks, I mean, some of it's good, there's some good YA literature, it's consequential, poetic, and thoughtful. I don't want to diss everybody, but there is an element of it that's, prophets turned into colorful kind of repeaters and things for mass consumption. But they trust us with the kids because they just can't resist that massive market. But in the adult market, it's another story, right? That's why we did that campaign, for me, it was basically, as an organizer, you want to seek out, like in the cultural realm, you want to seek out teachable moments. And I'm like, oh, wow, Miriam wrote that scaling, you're no Steinbeck then, man. I was like, oh, wow, I like your voice. I reached out to her, I didn't know her. I said, hey, man, look, I'm Roberto. I've organized a few things in my life, and I think we can take this energy you're putting on this white woman and putting it where it belongs, on the industry that created her, right? Not just the Frankenstein monster, but Frankenstein, what? Dr. Frankenstein. And so, they gave us, we hit the piñata, it gave up some candy, right? Gave us some new jobs for people, some writers getting good deals. Hey, I applaud that too. We helped make it happen. But the most important part of it was really us.
Well,
Us waking up to,
absolutely.
this industry sees us this way, and if we take action, we can have an impact.
Well, it's like you said, I mean, it's just a symptom of so many aspects of our culture that just see us as these marginal people, when we're the ones who keep the whole country running, really, and just that we're inconsequential. And the whole stereotype of Latinx mestizo people as unintelligent, unintellectual, right? And I just feel like I've been fighting that my whole life.
No, I feel you on that. I mean, like, I had to make a decision in this book about, okay, well, first of all, I never imagined myself writing a memoir. But I had to tell my dad's back end story, which is really astonishingly heavy, right? And I do mean astonishingly heavy. And then I was like, if I want to talk about gangs, I have some life experience that resembles that as a working class kid. So I can bring the reader closer to the heart of this monster that they've created by telling my own story, right? My own drugs to be an working class. And they say, okay, I'm gonna do a memoir. Shit, do I come out about my militancy in the Frente, urban commando? I never, except friends knew, but close friends knew, but I wasn't out of. That was a lot, Trump, neo-fascism, climate change. This is a good time right now to kind of come out about that for the young bucks and pick up, hey man, does your heart beat at this rhythm, at this pace about the condition of your world? Does your heart feel like this? Because if it does, there was a time when your heart beat like this. Some of us decided we were going to become this thing called revolucionarios. That was a big motive for me to write that into the book, because it's like the idea of left politics in the US. Again, we're outside of the kind of progressive liberal imaginary, the black-white binary that is at the heart of.
Oh, yeah, we're just this poor,
Yeah, I'm like, okay.
emaciated immigrant.
The Black Panthers are great, but let me tell you about the Frente and our fucking transnational struggle against the empire in the last 12 years. It cost a lot of lives, a lot of tragedy, but also had epic, like stories of like your book. I mean, Hector, everybody know Hector's most recent novel? Right, it's about a guy who's in the FMLN.
A white guy who's in the
A white guy in the FMLN, which is cool because how many of us get to write about white people, man? Hector's done it. Right? That's Hector's like, that could be an epitaph if he wrote about white people.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that at the highest level of writing about our experience and how we have been imagined as a people and how we've been wronged as a people, there's a sad white story, and that's sad. I mean, we are marginalized by people. We are created into this sort of cartel monster on television and movies because that's an extension. It's an expression of white fears. It's an expression of white insecurities, right? The whole creation of Trumpism comes from this lonely, sad, confused white person. So yeah, I mean, I wrote this crazy novel, and also I wanted to just show I could write about anything I wanted to, and see if I could get away with it. And I dedicate 4 or 5 years of my life to this novel, half of which takes place in your country, and half of it was recreating the Salvadoran Revolution, which was so amazing and so fun.
It was
And,
like the clandestine hideouts and the coding. I was like, fucking Hector, man, you got it. Like, good research. Okay, but then I found out he had access to
yeah.
the dude's notes. And stuff.
And then I went to Morazán too, and I interviewed compañeros, who many of whom still live there.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it was an incredible experience, and I just, most people in the United States don't know this history. The incredible improvisation of the Salvadoran Revolution. You're talking about a group of campesinos, students, undergraduates,
Women.
and active, people who grew up really poor, because a lot of the leading militantes in the FMLN were people from the lower middle class, or people from working class, very, very poor people. Campesinos too, And to me, that was like this incredible event, and I had this document from this, this white guy, Joe Sanderson, whose nom de guerre was Lucas in Frente. And I just thought, I can link these two things together. I can sort of link this Midwestern family, and this crazy Salvadoran, epic, which was the revolution in Morazán, right?
Well, not in El Salvador, because
In El Salvador.
Joe belonged to one of the 5 families, like in the
Yeah.
old school 40s mafia in the US. There's 5 groups in the FMLN.
Right. And they were one of the crazier and
They were one
self-destructive ones.
They were one, yeah. He belonged to the one that was called the ERP.
They killed Roberto.
That killed Roque Dalton and led a group of poets. Matt, you should know this story. A group of poets was pissed off that they killed Roque Dalton, went and established their own revolutionary. Poets actually started their own revolutionary political military organization, which I've always been like, that's how it needs to be, because as the US has proven, you can't sustain struggle solely with money. The bullets fly and all those fucking dollars don't go anywhere. But if you have like this other sensibility that I associate with like Fort warriorship, right? Where you kind of if it was to happen, you ask yourself what? You don't say like, please Mark, fucking save my ass, bro. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? What makes you hold your ground and sustain the fight through over time? And I associate that with spirituality and poetics, and so I think, that's part of between the lines of the book. That's what's in there, is communicating after 30 years of stuff to try to say, like, for the young people especially, look, this is what makes for sustainable struggle as far as my experience.
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, the Salvadoran struggle, and Guatemala too, all those movements were really, they start off with historical materialism, right? That's like the theoretical part of it. Marxism, you're supposed to study history, right? So the really interesting thing is that you take campesinos and trade union people, and you sit them down and you make them read the Communist Manifesto and the German ideology, because it's like a lot of people who became, they had to, but it's based on history. So your own sense of Salvadoran history before you became awakened with consciousness, when you were growing up, what did you know about Salvadoran history?
Postcards. Postcard history. Your family has this heavy baggage story, but they're not telling you anything. It's almost like, I would imagine, and this is not uncommon in other. I made a study when we created Central American Studies at Northridge. I made a study of kind of how you turn mass murder and extreme violence, genocide into a discipline, an intellectual discipline. And I learned all this stuff. We're doing that. So like, and I started learning that anytime there's this moments of such extreme violence, there's extreme silence that follows.
Wow.
Yeah, there's extreme silence. And so the key was, how do you break
the silences for me. And so we created a discipline that had as one of its priorities, kind of the study of violence. It's one of the four, how do you say ejes in English?
Axes.
Axis. Oh, by the way, before I forget, if you want to study the Salvadoran Revolution and its kind of internal culture and mechanics, the best book in the English language is not mine. It's my friend Joaquin's book. It's called Poets and Prophets of the Resistance. And he has a very inside view of these matters, and it's very thorough and well written, and I baptized the book because he had some shit. I was able to give it more like, well, anyway, that just me needed to.
So history, so you only had like this postcard notion.
Oh yeah, postcard notion, and then little by little, I start finding out like my family history a little bit on my dad's side, especially. There were these women who were elites in the coffee. If you read the book, you'll see that my dad's family from Ahuachapan, which was the coffee producing region. And when you're talking about coffee in El Salvador, you're talking about this extraordinarily bloody being.
Right.
Right? History behind it. And there's a good book, that guy that Brett wrote a book on coffee recently. It's pretty good. So I find out that some of these elite women in particular committed old school lefties of this, political suicide, class suicide. Where you're this upper class person and then you say, my interests are not aligned with those of my class. I'm going to take that and align it with the interests of the working class, right? And that's class suicide. So these women in El Salvador who were my family, my dad, joined. I didn't know them, but I knew their story, and they had joined the Frente, being commanders, and they're badass. So then I started, well, this Salvadoran thing's pretty cool. After all, because I had a lot of shame. The postcard,
Yes.
you have a postcard, and you have this shame that because there's nothing that tells you. Look at the Chicano struggle, man. Fuck, so much struggle, and folks are still being like just put down discursively,
Right.
labor-wise and otherwise. So Salvadoreños, we had no discursive stuff in the English language. So the pain and the lack of positive reinforcement and the postcard perspective had me being like colonized or looking back on it. But then little by little, I started, getting political. I started like doing stuff. UFW in San Francisco, Cali Foods, the boycott the Reds. So I was like smoking pot. And then I went to El Salvador as a more political entity. And suddenly there's this revolution. All the walls have slogans, the floors have poetry on them, revolutionary poetry. And you're around this culture where, man, there's shit going on here. One of every 3 people was organized against the state during the war. According to the Universidad Centroamericana, the Central American University. So imagine if we had one of every 3 people organized here. Esta tortilla le dieron vuelta. So, the revolution was the avenue for me to actually rescue myself from the claws of colonialism. It was like, damn, man, that's how it is. The way they interpreted the Bible, liberation theology.
Right.
I had been a right-wing evangelical Christian before this. I got on my knees and I prayed for Ronald Reagan, true story, it's in the book. And then I found the Salvadoran Revolution, and then suddenly this interpretation of Jesus as libertador, Jesus as a source of emancipation. The Bible is a book about freedom in this life, not in the next life. And these people organizing in base communities, and then I fall in love with Jean. And she's like this gonna be nun who becomes a revolutionary, fall in love, and she totally takes me for a ride. I'm still kind of like, wow.
Well, yeah, I think that trauma, shame, love, resistance, it's a progression, And I know that trauma produces shame because I see it, because I teach at UC Irvine, and I have a lot of immigrant students. I have a lot of first, second generation students, and they're writing about all these things that happen, the Mexican sort of border crossing experience. And it's really a natural thing to sort of take that trauma and become, and turn it into shame and silence. But there's also part of you, and I think this is true in my own family, where my father was traumatized by the poverty of Guatemala. But there's this part of you that loves yourself. You're taught to love yourself. You're taught to love where you come from. You're taught to love who you are. And that part of you is the part that says, wait, let me go back and understand what happened to me. Right? Let me understand how this came to be. And that's the process you described.
That's going to be part of my next book. The next book is going to be about my mom. My dad's story is like, sorry. Man, that's a good smell, right? So, whatever you brought with you, bro, keep bringing it. Sorry. It's okay. So, my next book's about my mom and this walking, talking, flying rainbow book called Scarlet Macaw. My mom turned it. You've seen them, you just probably don't know sometimes. It's called Scarlet Macaw. And it's like this border smashing, like my mom was. So my mom was the one who taught people to love. So I got to go through the underworld journey of this book so that I could now kind of go into the kind of flying part of it that is a different kind of power. It's power of, my dad's got this whole gravity thing. My mom had this levity thing. There's a great power in levity, like getting with light. So I absolutely agree with you. It's the love of ourselves that we're transmitted in our culture as well. That is going to carry through the dark night that's here, right? Because it is. It's here.
Right.
We just don't have the urgency because nobody's telling us how big the urgent is because we're in the empire. But go south, go anywhere south, and you'll see that it's here already, and it's coming here.
Well, explain. What do you mean by that?
Well, I reported on immigration as a journalist. I've gone around the world, gone to interview some of the top thinkers about migration policy and just migration generally, right? And there's estimates that say that anywhere between 500 million to 1 billion people will be uprooted by climate change next decade. So, the peoples of the South are like I went to the border with Turkey and Syria, talked to Syrian refugees and people that are working with them studying. I've been to Juarez when Juarez is really heavy, and it still is heavy. And I went to Salvador and I got into things there and why Salvador so got this high homicide rate in the world when I'm there. Talk to scientists and they'll tell me the violence in these different places is climate change, flooding, heating, destroying crop cycles, pushing migration into the cities that then create tension in society. It exacerbates. To look at books, and I don't know, I want to do something with it, but there are these books on revolution in the Atlantic, around the Atlantic in the 18th century. And they're about climate change in the Atlantic and the way climate change facilitated revolutionary struggle because it weakened the empire. You should kind of be studying this stuff right now, right? Because the empire really is getting weaker. It just will never tell you that. It will never tell you that. But if you can't feel that it's weaker, if you can't feel that change is possible, then you're doomed by your own thing, right? So that's what national security is all about. National security is primarily like a psychological operation. Friends of mine who were trained by the Vietnamese generals in Vietnam, Japanese generals, arguably the greatest political military thinkers in history. So I say to my friend, hey bro, what's the fucking Jedi knowledge? Tell me, drop that knowledge on me, man. And my friend, you never know you're talking to the person who has
maybe about 16 more years revolutionary experience in Czech Republic. And he says, he's bookish looking guy. Well, you know, if you want Jedi knowledge, it's that, you know, revolution and war are primarily so actos espirituales, spiritual acts.
Right.
And he said, well, what could be translated as psychological? Yeah, because you got your adversaries, troops, and their psychology. You've got the population between you, so you want the population between you to be neutral, aligned, or spiritual. And then you got the animals of your troops, which is the determinant factor at the end of the day. Your troops, which is why the US is always getting its ass kicked in its engagements around the world, because they have no ideological, spiritual sustenance to be able to fight over an extended period in war. So that's just a possibility.
You know, when you think of Central America in the American bingo imagination, okay,
Mhm.
there's like the stereotype has like these two extremes. One is the Guatemalan nanny, right? Guatemaltecos are famous for being great nannies, right? Sandra Simulo even has a joke about it, right? It takes a village to raise a child, and in LA, it's a Guatemalan village, right?
Mhm.
And the other side of that stereotype now about Centro Americanos is MS-13, you know? And you write about you know, gangs is in the title of your book. What do you sort of make of that stereotype, and also how you know what's going on with in El Salvador?
Well, the stereotype was born here in LA. Anybody, you all know that. The gangs were born here of migration and of gang culture. I mean, people know Alex Sanchez, I mean, I'm sure.
Right.
My friend started Homies and Needles. So, I mean, yeah, there's an industry built around creating monsters. And in Mexican kids, I mean, there's a reality of narco, and then there's the image of it, right? And there's just, you know, empire is gonna mass produce monsters. That's been the business of empire forever. So they found, I remember back when, after the Soviet Union, it was like, watch, who are these dudes gonna make their new monster?
Right.
So and I remember there was almost a menu laid out by the guy named Samuel Honey.
Right.
He laid out like, you know, these scenarios. Here was a clash of civilization. And it was basically a menu for empire to decide, are we gonna go after the Chinese? Is it gonna be the Muslim terrorists? Is it gonna be, you know, Russia reconfigured? Is it gonna be narcos? So they had a menu of options, and they've exercised those menus in different ways. And I think a category that is a gang. As, for example, the United States started resembling a country of the South, a Latin American country,
Right.
in the 70s, beginning in the 70s, right, when globalization was about to set in, neoliberalism with Thatcher and Reagan, kind of like decimating the state, destroying unions, globalizing manufacturing. All this is turning the US into a country of the South. Parts of the country. And so when you have that, you have the militarization that accompanies Latin Americanization too, right? There are two processes of what I call Latinoamericanizaciones, you know, the decimation of the welfare state and the economy and neoliberalism, and then the policing that supports it, which is why here in LA, beautiful, that's one of the reasons I love it, because you see like, you know, I know you're old enough. Remember Adam 12. They have these thin ass uniforms, right? And now we live in an age where the uniforms are like RoboCop. Right, so you follow the, just looking at the uniforms and the way they're, and you start seeing the response to neoliberalism by the state in the inner city, right? And so the gangs fit perfectly. And California's always been a major innovator of militarized counterinsurgent policing. Like in the book, I trace how
LAPD and INS, Immigration Acquisition Service, help define the gang issue is, and remember, you're talking about these kids who were in Pico Union. You know, when I was there, they were going to Liborio Market on Vermont, and they were buying machetes. Why are these kids buying these machetes? Because they were going to schools or they were in areas where they were in contact with black Crips, blood gangs, and Mexican mafia were way better armed. So kids took to getting machetes. So then journalists like Lisa Ling, no, not pseudo-journalists, she's not. Lisa Ling, the LAPD, and a host of media and policing interests started creating this most dangerous gang in the world image that to this day is so powerful in the imaginary that our peers in the media are still using Getty photos, you know, because you got to get the cachet photograph of gangs with tattooed face. That's like 10 years ago, man. I've interviewed the gang leaders. They don't do that anymore, but they're sustaining this image for obvious reasons. Trump benefits from it. Policing benefits from it. So my mission in writing that part of the book was that I would or I go out and find the dominant image of Salvadorians. I taught a class called Salvadorian. And what's the dominant image? Gangs. Except the variation was sometimes it's MS-13, sometimes it's 18. That was a dominant image of. So I'm like, my mission, if I want to, you know, I started off talking about humanization and dehumanization. I have to humanize myself and our people to the degree that I can. I need to attack that gang image. So I went in to these really scary ass places to meet with gang members who turned out to be what? As human, product of society, just like you and I. There, some of them are real hardcore killers. I met with guys who are at the very top of both gangs, like this gang influence stuff. Yeah, you know, and it was a really scary thing. But and I met people at the very low, but low levels, and you know, the kids aren't all killers. They're kids. They're 11 years old, 12 years old. They're not even factoring that into the image. So I had to go in and destroy that image to the degree that I could. I'm not going to do it just with one book, but I feel like le vamos a dar un talegazo a la mierda, right? I'm going to like get a strategic fit that shows gangs are human beings. You trust me as a narrator, eventually you're going to be there when I'm talking to this guy. He's telling me he's a father of 2 kids who would never be in a gang. He's telling me he loves literature, that he loves. He actually was reading Homer. He's reading like Garcia Marquez, Galeano. You know, it's in the book. He's got this really super brilliant guy who happened to grow up like my dad in a shanty town with no light. When he told me this thing, it's like, yeah, he told me he would read books under candlelight in a shanty town. Poetic image that he gave me. And if the dude's a hardcore killer at the very top of both gangs. So my vision was to find the heart in the darkness, right? Because that's the dominant frame for us as peoples, as Central Americanos, this heart of darkness. Joan Didion did a lot to, which is why I've written a few articles about Joan Didion.
Well, the whole creation of the monster image, I mean, just to state the obvious, it's a creation of white supremacy, okay? Because it's a creation, it comes from the fact that there are so many Latinos in this country. And so there is like this, you know, the United States is becoming a mestizo country. There was this thinker in the 60s who said, you know, an African-American critic who said that the United States was becoming a mulatto country, you know, because there was so much about the American character that's been shaped by African-American culture, right? So today you would say, you know, the whole country has been hip-hopified, right? All kids, all young people, anybody below a certain age, in a certain sense, their aesthetic has been shaped by hip-hop. So I think what's happening in the United States is that the United States is becoming shaped by a Latin American, that word is loaded, right? By a Latinx, whatever, sensibility, you know, being like hugging each other and being like extremely, you know, just being emotional. And so, you know, everybody in this country, unless you live in like the most remote part of like Alaska, knows a Latino person in this country by relation, by work. And so there's such intimate contact between us and white people that the people who want to defend white supremacy have to create this idea of us as monsters, right? And so that's behind the whole MS-13, and that's all that Fox News ever talks about, right? They talk about cartels and MS-13. They talk about, you know, the caravans at the border and all this other stuff, because it's just an attempt to play that card, right, and defend the white character of the country.
Absolutely, the border is as much a cultural thing as it is it's more, I would argue it's more of a cultural development than it is a physical. It's not real. And the planet wasn't born with this thing growing out of like a tree, right? It was put up by human beings, and then, but it has very deep material consequences. But it's a you know, people like Wendy Brown, theorists, and others have talked about it as a form of performance.
Absolutely.
And so all the different, there's a performance. There's performance of the state. There's a performance of migrants at the border. They're put in this theater. There's a performance by the, you know, you want to reinforce the idea of the performance of the border. You send boots on the ground to make it like this real thing that's also a threat, and both parties contribute. Like, you know, the idea that the Democrats are going to defend us. Anybody here? I'm not even talking to you guys. I know Carlos, my friend here, he's a PhD. What do you call it? You know, I like to talk about Carlos too much.
So the book's been out for a year, right? Of course, it was like my book was a COVID book, right? It came out during COVID and all the virtual events. But has anything, have you sort of had a sense of like what the reaction was from the people who intended to read it? You know, like,
Oh yeah.
What's the reaction?
But I didn't write it, like, you know that, like, we don't write for any specific audience. But in your heart of hearts, you want your people to read it.
Yeah.
I want Salvadorans, I want Central Americans, I want Latinx people to read it. I want young people to read it. And I've started going out into the world like this. I've been in New York, I've been doing some in California, and I've met with, like in New York, I met one Dominican and some Salvadoran and Mexican young people, and I was blown away by the part of the book. And it's not surprising, but it did surprise me when I found out what was the part that most impacted me. You know what it was? The father-son story. But not just for father-son, but also for daughters, because daughters have fathers too, right? Many do things. So some of those fathers have a fucked up side or completely fucked up. So I had students coming up to me even before, and when I would talk to them, already like crying, but then they would come up to me, they would start crying even before they started talking to me, because they had never had something that resembled that part of their lives that nobody, you know, because, you know, we have that folkloric sense, man, I don't want to diss my family in public,
Right.
but that's also a killer for us, because it creates this false family self, this false self, which is what fear does, right? Fear, ego creates a false self.
It infantilizes us.
Yeah.
Because one of the things you have to do to grow up is you have to stand up to your parents, right? And so we're infantilized in American media because those stories aren't being told. You know, they're not telling stories with like this sort of Henry Miller or Tennessee Williams like type complexity about Latino people. They're not getting on, and so people don't see that reflected. And part of it is too that many of us as creators, we're like afraid, you know, because we think of our books as like they're supposed to represent the community, and we want, you know, you're not supposed to put out your, you know, trapos sucios, you're not supposed to put out your dirty laundry. And so there's a lot of that going on, you know, among us as creators. But yeah, so we're totally infantilized. And so when someone sees, like in your book, and now more books coming out, like my friend Obed Silva's memoir, which is coming out in December about his alcoholic father, you know, people like, yeah, that's like that fucked up family. That's my family, right? And there's just a real hunger for that, I think. And now there's this, younger readership that's coming up, and they're gonna want those books.
This is why I called the book Unforget. The concept I first discovered when I was a right-wing Christian, right? Because I was a fucking right-wing Christian. I'd be a militant for Donald Trump had I not got saved by something in the revolution. So, gloria a Dios for the revolution. So, I first discovered this term, which because I did Bible studies and studied theology, and aletheia is Greek ideal that refers to the journey of the dead into the underworld before they have to go to either Hades or Elysium. They had to forget who they were by crossing the river Lethe. The Lethe River was the river of forgetting. So that you had to forget who you were in life to move forward in death.
Right.
Which I always thought was taken with that. And the Christians turned that term into truth, synonymous with truth, aletheia. Unforgetting meant truth. So then I'm like, oh, that's cool. But, I was a right-wing Christian, so who cares? I got out of that, joined, did what I did, went back to school, and I found, studied some German philosophy classes. And we had this woman named Hannah Arendt talking about aletheia. And the way that theorists like Hannah Arendt looked at unforgetting was that you needed to turn memory into a theater of battle to fight fascism. You have to fight it at its roots.
Wow.
So in the culture, there's a theater of memory that we have to win. Just look at and I'm sorry, that is you, Christina, right?
Yeah.
That is you, beautiful. She's Christina Ibarra, who just won a MacArthur Genius Award along with my friend Alex. They won it with a woman named Monica Martinez. Monica has written a book on something called La Matanza, right, in Texas, which is the slaughter of something on the order of 5,000 or 15,000 people. We don't know who were slaughtered by the Texas Rangers. They were lynched, they were shot, they were dragged on horses, they were all to steal their property. This is a mass murder of an epic scale that's been completely erased, not just from Texas, but from the imaginary of the United States. So we have to fight that battle. That's why I'm really happy, not just that, Alex and Christina won, because I love that, I love them, but that Matanza is one of the most important historical stories. I think we need to really fight to get into the historical memory of the United States, because this intersectional empire shit just ain't working, right? And it's bent on erasing us further. So, I love the concept of unforgetting, because it's the equivalent of what in America Latina le llaman memoria histórica.
Right.
Where you got to go back, we got to know who filled the mass graves with our dead. That's why I put the forensics back end story there as kind of a metaphor of what is our job as agents of change right now. We have to piece together the bones of memory to move forward with something in our hearts and minds to be able to move forward with. Or as like my abuelita was a seamstress. I use that metaphor because sewing together threads to give back something to an indigenous woman, for example, who grew up dreaming of being a princess as a child when she was with their indigenous people in the western part of Salvador, and then there's a massacre, and she had to flee to the city. This young woman with her family, and she becomes a sex worker. My abuelita sewed a dress and gave, she would size up the woman and say okay, what do you dream of? What do you want? And my abuelita would create a dress for her. And which is, again, for me, a metaphor of again, what we as writers use, I think any writer and any creative person right now who's Latinx especially, we know what we have to do. And we have to put together the bones of our history and give our people back the humanity that's being denied. So we have to turn memory into a theater of battle and be militant about storytelling. I've never thought I would say, it sounds fucking artsy fartsy. You know, to me, it's like a leftist and radical, I'm like, who cares? But now I swallowed all those words.
That's gonna be my last question, I think, and then we should open it up to see if anybody has any questions here in the audience, but yeah, so you mentioned this idea of poet warriorship, you know? Can you, what does that mean to you?
Well, I mentioned like, I learned about it in Salvador. There's some of it in the book, the way that, you know, I'm in this whole way of being Salvadoreño that was opposite the postcard
Right.
of Salvadoreño identity that I grew up with, like many of you. You know, you grew up, your family wants to curate this beautiful image of your family for you, and they don't mean ill, but they don't know that they're kind of like, you know, kind of shaping you and your memory and your identity in ways that may not be so good for you if you don't know the deeper, difficult truth. So I'm in El Salvador, and I mean, actually, when I look back, it started with June Jordan at Berkeley. Poet June Jordan, like, was at Berkeley. He was teaching us about basically using like popular education, educación popular, where you use local reality, immediate reality to raise consciousness. She was doing it around literature. So that you learn to write poetry, and then you go out and teach poetry, right? You go out, you tell what you've learned. You don't gotta be in some like big literary setting. You just actually go to a spot like this, put together some chairs, develop your pedagogy, and adelante. And then the students will have to go out into, I mean, Nicaragua, you know, too bad what's happening, you know, in many ways now, but Nicaragua back in the day was the center of the Rev poet warriorship in the Americas. And then Salvadoreños, we learned some of that. And like I mentioned earlier, you had La Mazacuata, which was a group of poets who went on to help create a political military organization. So they would fire bullets of lead and of words. Right? And I think like I'm really taken with the concept because you know, I wrote the book in part as a blueprint for apocalyptic times. And I don't mean apocalyptic like those stupid as zombie movies. And I mean apocalyptic like we are in a very difficult moment in world history. Let's just face it, and let's move forward. Your kids, you got to prepare your kids for a difficult world. So you don't prepare them by teaching them to ignore it. I don't think you know, I helped raise a young boy. I didn't train him to live away from it. I hopefully taught him to face it. He's actually organizing against the authorities at his high school before he graduates. So I'm ecstatically happy that he's doing that. So, but so we need nourishment, or what I would call we're not in a sustainable world. And to get back to a sustainable world, we need something akin to what I call sustainable struggle. So sustainable struggle, like when the bullets, not just in battle, but in the bullets of your life start coming at you. We've all got more bullets than that now, metaphorically speaking. How do we hold our ground and stay in the fight and not resign ourselves? You got to have some powerful spiritual sense. And I think I associate that with poetry, the truth of poetry, the beauty in poetry, and a poetic, and a sense of the poetic and poetics that doesn't separate the political from the poetic, right? Because we live in a country where you all know the concept of poetry and the concept of art is over there, and the concept of politics. So even though when you look at it, it's really they are one, even in the, you know, there's like a, you know, people get mad at me like this, but like this guy Jericho Brown. Everybody loves Jericho Brown. I don't. Jericho Brown, African American, gifted poet, but politically, no está en mierda. You know, he's part of the problem politically. He's here tweeting about those poor Central American kids. That evil Donald Trump is so I tweeted back at him, hey man, I don't know if you know, but this caging, I've been to those cages. This separation, I've talked to these friends. You know who it began with? By the thousands. Yeah, with Barack Obama. What did Jericho Brown do after I did that? Yeah, he basically blocked me.
Right.
He blocked me, right? And this is like what's considered progressive in the poetic sphere. And I think that's a problem when your politics are separate from your politics, from your poetic. And I think, I don't know, I just feel like, I started writing a book about, I call it Letter to a Young Poet Warrior. I'm starting to think about how do we, what's the knowledge we need to drop on the young folks so that they can sustain their struggle. So,
Well, I think that one of the things that you do is you validate their need to be angry. You know, and there's there's this idea that our political discourse should be friendly. You know, and that it should be it should be a pleasant experience to talk about racism and injustice, and we should all sort of just feel great about it afterwards. But no, we have to be unsettled, and we have to be pissed off, and we have to be willing to make people angry, even our supposed allies.
and we need to be effective. We need to tear shit down for successful. Just don't be a martyr. I didn't get into this stuff to be a martyr. I get, you gotta play to win. That's what really excites me right now. I think Latinx peoples in particular right now are primed up to win some shit and really fight hard. We started the ball rolling here in LA back with Proposition 187. Elements of the Democratic Party took it from the east side and channeled it into leadership of the Assembly and the Senate and to elect mayors of Los Angeles. But I think there's other flanks of that movement that are primed to kind of rise up to this new occasion of this epic moment. I guess I'll leave you with that. I really encourage everybody to be fucking crazy as you can be, because the political moment demands embrace whatever epic sensibility. Embrace it, because you're in an epic moment as ever there's been.
Right.
And it's gonna get more intense. So fuck it, pull out your best shit and go. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions? And I'll translate it for Facebook Live here. If anybody wants to ask any questions. Yes, in the back.
I'm curious about what you mentioned earlier in your talk about.
I'm gonna leave it open, yeah, sorry.
Thank
You
you.
might have to speak with me.
Yeah. Did you say you hired a therapist to go through the process? And one thing about a therapist as somebody helping one get through some kind of individual experience. But this book and its contents are about rating your experiences as an individual tied to your experiences as part of a collective. It's like,
Yeah.
So what was the demons that you had to deal with in your relationship with the therapist, both at the individual level and at the
What was the what? I'm sorry.
well, maybe I shouldn't use the word demon, but
The demons.
yeah, what were the battles? What were the difficulties? What were the challenges that you confronted with yourself, with your upbringing, and with your society that the therapist helped you?
Oh man, that's a whole nother book, but
I'm asking the question because the book was. I'm like some of those kids that I'm already a middle-aged man, and I gravitate to book.
you're a talented scholar. You're the dude I think you're that I've seen mad in
Anyway, so that's thank you. But how did you what was your relationship with the therapist?
Well, I go in skeptically to a little background. I actually met a guy named Ignacio Martin Barro. So he's a Spanish priest who became one of Latin America's, I would argue, greatest psychologists. He brought us this concept of liberation psychology, taking kind of Paulo Freire's banking relationship, for example, where you have the teacher just dropping knowledge on one, unilaterally on the student, and the student just regurgitates what the bank says. He applied that analysis to the client psychologist relationship where he recognized that it was power laden and that it was, where it assumed in the, say, the war survivor and the therapist relationship is that the war survivor is going to carry the load of the war by themselves. And that's what I mean, but always is known as tied to social causes. So the therapist has to kind of integrate consciousness of the social problematics into the therapeutic relationship. You can't just drop the whole moral, emotional load of a war on a victim. So I went in, my therapist was, he's an old hippie, big guy, son of a Holocaust survivor. But he wasn't a liberation psychologist. He was just really committed, let's say, progressive, lefty, Jew therapist. And beautiful man. And I kind of like, I had been, by the time I started with him, I'd already been through some therapists. I kind of, it's kind of like any other car or thing that you manage. Like, okay, I basically went, we're going to work on this and we're going to map out the emotional terrain that I'm going to traverse in this story I want to tell. We're going to traverse. So I knew I was going to open up not just Pandora's box, but Pandora and her sister, Prima, Carmelita's box of horrors in my life. My father beating my ass, humiliating me, the war, street violence, being in mass grave sites, being in, talking to people who were experience genocide, who subconsciously transmit these things to your own subconscious. So I'm absorbed all this stuff, and I gotta be very careful because, again, I hate to age sexually, but I know you remember Scanners, that movie that dude's head blows up. So I didn't want to be like Scanners. I didn't want to be like Scanners and have my head blow up from all these things. So we took it piece by piece. So the most difficult things were, one of them was my father and the deep, deep, deep sadness that still grips me to know what my father did. My dad, I'll tell you, man, I hope you buy the book anyway, but my dad was one of the last living witnesses to what in El Salvador is called La Matanza, 1932, which scholars at Oxford told me is arguably the single most violent episode, not just in Latin American history, but in world history, in terms of the numbers of people killed in a concentrated space in a concentrated amount of time, no matter what we can happen. It killed tens of thousands of people. My dad's now one of probably less than a handful of people that have witnessed this act. And to find out my dad, he never said anything for almost 70 years about this. To think of the terror that the child my father was had to experience, to say, imagine a terror that you can't speak of for 70 fucking years. That's how deep my sadness has been. That's how deep my anger has been. I mean, it's also how deep my overcoming has been. So I that was one of the most difficult, but also liberating. I think the degree of difficulty is inversely proportional to the degree of liberation. And I do mean liberation. We really do need to kind of put back that old Jedi knowledge of the 70s of the liberation movements, liberation psychology, liberation, because we have to think about freedom. Ignacio Martin Baró. Yeah, he wrote a book on liberation psychology, translated by my friend Adrian Aaron. It's available. So, yeah, I could go on about that one. Thank you.
Somebody else? What other questions?
Comments?
Yes.
Just a quick one. I'm a undergrad at UCSB, granting a class with Sherry Morgan.
Hey.
She sent us hello.
Oh, man.
And I'm working on my senior thesis on Central American literature, and I'm reading her book. And I'm from this community, I just found this 15, 16. So chapter 2, working through, going through my own process, getting in,
Mhm.
working through, dealing with the trauma of these things. So, coming back to being out there. No questions.
Yeah, bro, I could die fucking happy now that you said that. That's precisely what you just gave me, that as a writer, that's a gift for me, man. Thank you so much. You honor me. That's why you work hard, so that like this one's going in that direction. You're facing your demons. You're unforgetting who you were. I mean, I had forgotten but in my public persona, I had forgotten one of the better sides of the part of me that said, fuck it, I'm gonna go blow shit up and stop it. Fight fascist military dictatorship. I had to stay quiet about that for most of my adult life. And so I was like, that was hard for me because I really risked my life for what I believed in. I couldn't talk about it because I feared what the state would do because we did, in fact, tocar el tigre. We did touch the tiger and the balls. So, and that's what Salvador was saying. You have to touch the tiger right there if you're going to make social change. You're not going to figure progressive out of what's happening right now. You've got to go far. It's hard to be. So, okay, here's my example of it. Thank you. You honor me.
Oh, in the back, yes.
I want to say thank you as well. I'm Salvadoran, first generation here. My father was killed at 2 years old in El Salvador.
No, your dad was still when you were 2. Now you're.
Well, I was 2, yes. I was 2 years
You would
old.
have been the youngest.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, bro. I just messed with you.
Yeah, no, yes. He was killed out there. So I grew up in matriarchal family, all women.
Matriarchal family among Salvadorans?
Yeah.
Unheard of, man.
Right? Yeah. And so reading your book, as you mentioned earlier, was very powerful, very cathartic, relatable. It was from the very beginning, from the first page to why do Salvadorans sleep with machetes under their bed, right? I thought we were the only ones that did that. I didn't realize it was such a cultural thing,
Yeah.
And the generational trauma that comes down even when they don't talk about it. Like my family still doesn't talk about stuff.
That's the norm.
But we have what we carry, that burden that we don't know how to define. We don't have the words or the history to define what that burden even is, right? And your book, has helped you kind of understand and give some words to what that burden that so many of us carry them that are the first ones here, right? And we carry their stuff and we don't know what it is or why, right? So learning about that different side of the history, realizing that we're bonded, truly, Salvadoreños, Dominicanos, from all that. We are truly bonded from that experience. I feel like I know you. I feel like we're actually family just from reading your book because of that. And so just want to say truly thank you for writing this and for giving us, giving us a good name. Because as a Salvadorian, when I meet folks, when I've met white folks, and they ask me where are you from, and I tell them El Salvador, they're like, where in Mexico is that?
Right.
I've gotten that. And so, you're playing a big part and giving us a good, solid name that means something and deserves respect and the history to be unforgotten and retold over and over again by everyone here. So much obliged. Thank you.
I could die again. Happy. Yeah, no, thank you. You too honor me. And I don't write the book. You don't write for you write for catharsis?
No, I mean, I have a catharsis, when I'm writing it, but sometimes like on a daily basis, but I don't expect that to be the end product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The story has its own integrity. And if it's cathartic, it's cool, right? If you write poetry for catharsis, it becomes catharsis, right? Because Sandy's a really good poet, by the way, I don't know.
Also not.
And also novels, I'm sorry. But I don't write for catharsis, but if it's people find I had cathartic moments. I know it was like, man, what a relief, man. I'm anxious to get the second book behind so I can go and fly with my mom.
Wow.
Yeah, there's so many like young people here in LA and across the US, single mom headed household. I mean, like, you can see it in the book, in the footnotes, if you really geek out on it, like Carlos or some really scholars, where you see like, by 1922, when my dad was born, more than half of all households in El Salvador were female-headed households. So these are the statistical reality behind that ferocious Salvadoran mom that we all, many of us know, like powerhouse, like driven and, scrappy and doing whatever they're gonna do to raise their kids out of, this colossally bad poverty that was in Salvador, the poverty here. So thank you, man. You honored me.
Thank you.
I also love the book. Thank you very much. There's so much that I didn't know. There was some shame from that.
You're Salvadorian?
I'm not. I'm
Okay.
Mexican.
Okay.
But I still feel like it's important to know Latinx history. It's very different from Mexican history. Very different reasons why Mexicans come to the US versus Koreans come to the US. And seeing that in the book and understanding more of it is very powerful to me. So my question is, when did the follow-up book?
I'm not actually Tobar, man. You got. Actually, I'll go on you to talk about his next book. His paper is now. I would just say I hope to be finished. I'm just starting. No, actually, I did some research long ago. It's gonna take me about a year to write, then another year to edit, and 6 months or something after that. So, 2.5 years or so. But I have a cool piece coming out about what I call the gentrification of consciousness in psychedelics coming out.
Nice.
Yeah, no, I'm like, yeah, I'm a true Californian that way. It's the Bay Area, that's where the Bay Area is. Kind of way cooler than LA that way. The gifted consciousness there was, really exposed us to psychedelics early on. And I'm writing about what I call the gentrification of consciousness coming with the legalization of certain things. And I'll be writing journalism, doing things while I do this other book. So this has to be good. Hey, Hector, can you tell us about the next book? Because I think it's right to the point of everything we're talking about.
Thanks, Roberto. No, thank you. I mean that sincerely. I'm writing a book. It's called Our Migrant Souls. And it's essentially trying to write a book about what it means to be Latino or Latinx or Mestizo in this age of intolerance, and trying to see the construction of this idea of Latino or Latinx within the race history of the United States. Because to me, all the race categories that exist in the United States, they're basically fairy tales, right? They're made up stories. And that's something that a lot of Black scholars have written about in the last 10 years. Nelson and Painter has this great book, The History of White People, which is about that. It's about how this idea of white is created. And so the idea of Latino, of the dangerous mestizo, of the brown person, is this idea created in reaction to our increasing importance in American culture, right? In United States culture. And so I just sort of try to take this whole thing apart, and all this sort of imagery of us, and all this fucked up stuff too, in our own sort of definition of what our identity is. Because Latino or even Latinx, I mean, the term Latin races our indigenous and African identity, right? And that's a huge chunk of what it means to be Latino. So to me, Latino is a synonym for mixed. It's a story about empire. The one thing that unifies all these different peoples, whether they be Puerto Rican, Dominican, Guatemalan, Chicano, what unifies us is that we all have a story of empire in our lives, right? We have our lives have been shaped by U.S. imperialism.
Really?
The lighthearted question is,
Problematic. So, go ahead.
so
in terms of a dream team for an adaptation for film or streaming, in terms of director, music, score, soundtrack, with any people that inspire you, move you.
Me and Bada and Alex Rivera, I don't know how they do it out. Like, it's either Vin Diesel or The Rock. I mean, look, the physique, you got the physique. I'm more inclined to Vin to The Rock, just because he seems to be a little more shape than Vin Diesel these days. So, I don't know, man. Like, the book has been optioned. I just leave it there. Yeah, I'm open to suggestions if you have other actors who want to play me. I'm happy to consider it. Last question.
You might want to give details about the process of writing a book, how you get started.
I think both of us can answer. Hector's got more experience. Why don't you start?
The process of writing a book. Wow. Well, first of all, it's sort of like becoming a monk or a priest. It's something that you really shouldn't get into thinking you're going to make any money out of it. And you should do it because you hate the idea of being quiet. You hate the idea of other people being in print telling your story, And that's what led me to become a writer. And then, it's sort of like you just do a daily process. It becomes part of your daily life. I mean, all of us have other jobs, right? I'm a university professor. Before that, I was a newspaper reporter. So this morning, I was up 6 o'clock in the morning. And to me, that's sleeping in because I used to get up 5 or 4:30 in the morning to work on my last book. And usually write like an hour or two a day. And then seeking out criticism. I think when you first start out, too. When you first start out, I took classes at Beyond Baroque and in Venice. I took classes at UCLA Extension in short story writing. Just to sort of get feedback and to get a sense of what the craft is. Because when you become a writer, you're entering into this craft. It's a really, really old craft. It's a couple of thousand years old. And there are lessons and there's tricks and there's things that might not be immediately obvious when you first set out to do it. And just getting feedback from people is really, really important. And then just discipline and staying true to yourself, believing that there's something that you need to say that nobody else can say. And really holding on to that and having me too. I just have a lot of faith in my readers. I just feel like they're intelligent people. They don't want me to condescend to them. They just want, I want to give them all of my intellect, my passion, and it's all done in this same language, And also just recognizing how important all the languages that we have are. Like, for example, I grew up speaking Spanish and English, and I never read anything in Spanish until I was in college when I was 17 years old. But I had all the Spanish in my head, and just the language of the street, and nicknames, and Roberto's great, you're great with that, just all the argot and just the language of the streets, and all of that is valuable, You have to really, have faith in, it's a word game, and so you collect words all the time. You're just out looking for, the descriptions of colors and bases. And just, when you get really, really into it, it becomes almost kind of like this religious experience every day where you just feel really powerful for like 15 minutes, And then you feel really shitty when you look at what you wrote and it sucks. And, so it becomes this whole sort of process that you really have to live.
Yeah, I can't add much more to what I could say. In my language, it's like commitment. Commitment is really like, there's a quote by a dead white dude, German dude, polymath, brilliant, Goethe, Goethe. Goethe, it's actually not by him, it's some Brit dude that actually said it. He took what Goethe said, but the essence of it is like commit now, because then providence is going to fall into place in your favor. I take that phrase and I say, instead of providence, subconscious. Commitment organizes your subconscious. Just look at parents. Look at your friends who you grew up with, like I did, before they were parents, after they're parents, they're like parents. They're focused, and there's this deep thing that happens to you when you commit to something. And it organizes the most powerful part of it, I believe. So something to commit to that for me is like this is a beautiful vision. It has to be beautiful, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
It has to be beautiful in some form, because you're gonna be sleeping with this mud for a long ass time. You know, like, yeah, man, you're still beautiful. Yes, you are more beautiful than I've ever seen. So you gotta like really love what you're doing, and then organize your life in terms of economics so that you are sustainable in a consistent way to be able to write. And to stay writing, have an economic stability or an economics that allows you to have a chunk of time every day or every week, however you organize it. You don't have to write every day. You organize your life. Like I'm an organizer. So like, okay, I'm committed. I got a vision thing I want to do. And I got like, okay, I'm gonna make my money over here. And as a writer. So make my money over here. And then, okay, what do I need? So I get some literary consigliere. I got this guy, that guy over there, people around the United States and more people in America who I was selecting to be my consiglieres in terms of the craft. I had another set of consiglieres on the issues of publishing. That's a separate issue. You gotta see your way. So your vision has to carry you not just through the writing of the book. Then there's selling the book to a publisher, or you can self-publish now with tools. I'm too old for that shit, so good luck with that one, but I don't know, if I was young, I would be crazy. I'd go build a big audience and sell books and show that it's possible, but I'm getting older, so I don't want to use that time. So, having people that give you feedback, I made a list, ideally, and, the more you fall in love with it, the more you want to spend time with it. So, like, I was like, wow, I want to spend a week or 2 weeks just writing. Right, the concept when I first discovered it, damn, these people really live like that. Hector's like, yeah.
God bless you.
All right.
Thank you. God bless you too.
Dodgers. Not me. But like, I made a list of friends who, I knew would let me borrow their places to go write. Like go on a retreat, like my friend has an apartment in Santa Cruz, another friend has an apartment in Miami. They're like close friends, I'm tight with them. So I'm like, hey man, I want to go write. And I knew they weren't using their place. So I got my own residency when these official residencies would not, like, honestly, I don't know if I told you this, but I get rejected 9 out of 10 times right now after my book is published. With fellowships, residencies, and grants. And I'm told by people who I trust in this, it's partly not just being Latino, because that's not it. Just being a leftist over here doesn't get you in the graces of the liberal imaginary that dominates publishing. So I had to pick my own little residency by a week here at this apartment and a week over there, but stuff like that is really, take care of the practical stuff is a big deal. Surviving to write another day.
Yeah, and slow and steady is the way.
Yeah, and editing is writing. Really, that could be a whole, what do you call it? You can have a whole, couple of seminars on like editing is writing. I never understood that until now. But really, you lay the first draft on the canvas of the page, and then the real writing starts when you're really starting to
figure out what is really this about. And that's editing. Editing helps you figure out what it's really about and how to edit, how to cut it down, how to add in a way that gets at the real story. Yo creo que con eso ya nos despedimos. Thank you so much.
Gracias, thank you.
Thank you.
He has his books here for sale if you guys want him to sign it. And if you guys could help stack chairs, we can all chill and hang out, that'd be great. Thank you.